Welcome everyone to the second research seminar in the School of Law and Justice Research Seminar Series for 2023. Giving this presentation today is Dr. Rhett Martin, who is a senior lecturer in the School of Law and Justice. Rhett will be talking about agricultural traceability and the rise of RegTech. I'll pass over to Rhett.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome to my seminar. Some of my colleagues might be aware that I work in the cross-disciplinary space, law and intersections with things like agriculture and traceability and sustainability. And in the advertising paraphernalia, I was using agricultural traceability and agricultural sustainability interchangeably, which perhaps is a little bit confusing. But what it really is that agricultural sustainability traceability is really a subset of agricultural traceability. And so it can to some degree be interchangeable, but it's really a subset of the wider agricultural traceability. So what is traceability? What is traceability? It is the ability to share information and follow the movement of a product through all or part of its supply chain across the stages of production, processing and distribution. Now, this has been driven partly by globalization and requirements under compliance and regulation and establishing brand provenance and improving production efficiencies, so that the sorts of things that can benefit as a result of traceability is food safety, biosecurity, and a big driver of this is market access to overseas markets, so that the freedom of a business or a nation to sell goods into a specified foreign market. So you're being able to identify the traceability provenance of agricultural goods and services will improve market access in that way. The other benefit is that it builds brand provenance. So like you can establish, that's where sustainability is relevant. You can sort of track the provenance of a product and its sustainability credentials, which is a big issue. So, and one of the benefits of improved provenance is the enhanced traceability capability will reduce food fraud, which is estimated to cost globally $40 to $50 billion every year. It will enhance certification processes to establish certification for sustainability practices conducted by farmers. And in terms of product improvement, it can provide supply chain efficiencies and quality improvements as well in terms of identifying where a product comes from. And in terms of my research interest, which I said earlier is very much cross-disciplinary, I'm interested in the development of a traceability system. So a system-wide traceability system in relation to sustainability reporting. Now, in this slide, I'm making reference to the federal and also state governments have got a lot of research funding out for the building of a national agricultural traceability scheme. And when we talk about a traceability system, this refers to the way data is recorded and used to track a product one step forward and back along the supply chain. And information may be recorded manually on paper, then automated through an electronic digitized system. And so it does mean, and I have to be honest here, my technological awareness is average, but I am reasonably good at regulatory modelling. My thesis was on ecological sustainable forest management regulation. And so I'm interested in sustainability reporting as part of a system. So sustainability traceability is very much at issue here for me. And so that means we are talking about the interface between regulatory, the way that the regulators operate and regulatory modelling of regulation. For example, regulation that can be read, code read regulation that can be read by a machine or a software system. That needs to interact with the participants in agriculture, farmers, etc. And of course, it has to be interacting in turn with software providers. If you If you go into, if you just Google best RegTech brands, there's heaps. And so these solutions need to be, and I'll come to what I mean by RegTech in a minute. The traceability system is going to be enhanced by being able to identify with RegTech programs that will provide some benefits for the reporting process of farmers in the agricultural sector. So what the research is looking at and in participating in is developing there's currently a lack of common networks and collaboration platforms to bring together regulatory experts, software developers, and farmers. And so there needs to be that interaction. And so I can make a contribution from a regulatory perspective, and I'm trying to do so. It's currently the subject of a research grant application through a federal government program. And so I won't hold my breath on it, but it is important. And I'm certainly putting my hand up for it as well to participate in it. And that's that cross-disciplinary aspect to it, that I'm looking at working within this space to sort of enhance the regulatory modelling that will interact with farmers and the actual software systems that are available. So this slide is just talking about the benefits of traceability, which I've sort of mentioned before. Consumers can understand more about the products they buy, including the sustainability provenance of the products. Sustainability reporting can be enhanced through a proper system that's in place, so that there is a great push for sustainability reporting within the agricultural sector. Agricultural welfare obligations can be investigated more easily. Raise brand profile, enable information and data to be more readily accessible, and greater ability to reopen markets, which is a major focus of export markets for the government, to have greater access to export markets. Some pressing challenges, and that's what brings me to RegTech. So we're talking about agricultural traceability and the rise of RegTech. What do we mean by RegTech? Why are we putting these two together? And the answer to that is, well, hopefully will be clear by the end of the seminar, that RegTech refers to technology that enables regulatory requirements to be met more effectively and more efficiently. Now, there's a little blurb that I've got here which talks about the history of RegTech, and it's been given a major boost by obviously technological developments and advancements, but it was very much focused, it was very much very much driven by the financial crisis of 2008. And so RegTech has primarily been developed within the context of the financial services industry. So we've heard of FinTech, or RegTech is part of that. But a report by KPMG identified 3 stages in the RegTech revolution. The first was the period in the 90s and the 2000s when financial institutions began introducing new technologies to monitor and analyse risk of specific regulations or processes. These developed into some of the quantitative risk management practices that we're familiar with today. That's stage 1, 90s and 2000s. Stage 2, RegTech 2 tools have helped companies to comply with rules and improve their supervision activities. Most RegTech applications are focused on know your customer by improving consumer protection and challenging bad behaviours. And that's an example of RegTech in the banking sector. I used to teach banking law, and one of the key issues for banks is to be able to know your customer and identify the customer. Now, of course, when that was originally became an issue, then it was all done manually. And now, as a result of RegTech, the process is online and the whole process is done within 3 minutes to identify the customer. So that's stage 2. And then it moves into where we are now, stage 3 of RegTech, a move from know your customer to know your data. That's the change that this third stage is, as financial institutions start to view risks and regulations as data and prediction problems that can be addressed by technology. So I mentioned before, I don't want to harp on it, but my technological awareness is about average, but I'm going to have to make a very sharp increase in my awareness to address the software and the interaction with the farming sector and regulatory modelling. And that's where what I'm interested in. So to go back to just to continue the discussion about the importance of regulation and RegTech and regulatory modelling. Of course, the whole rise of RegTech now that we've got stage 3 is enabled by the reduced cost of technology and the proliferation of data, which creates a problem in terms of how we comply with the Privacy Act, which is an issue that has to be addressed. So there's high-level uses of technology for sophisticated uses and low-level uses of technology that can be more accessible by policymakers, regulators and regulated parties. So the know your customer technology is a low-level sort of example of RegTech, but there's of course more sophisticated examples. So, and RegTech solutions can be beneficial where regulated parties face complex or onerous regulatory requirements. There's a scope to undertake more risk-based approaches to regulation, which interests me very much in terms of my research on forest management regulation and risk-based adaptive management for forestry and ecological forest management. And technology can help to better monitor activity, including overcoming constraints related to spatial and physical presence, which is very relevant in forest management. And technology can unlock more uses of data to meet compliance goals. And a basic issue of regulatory modelling is to achieve the goal of regulation at the lowest possible cost, to reduce regulatory costs. So this is one aspect that could be achieved through RegTech. And so regulation modelling should be targeting the problem at the lowest possible cost and provide a proportionate response to the problem, and using processes that reduce compliance burdens. And all the developments that have occurred, artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, data analytics, data transfer protocols, and technologies used in more specialised applications such as distributed ledger technology like blockchain. These have all improved the ability of processing, speed of reporting and monitoring, integration of technological solutions and quality analytics using digital information and big data. So the uptake of RegTech solutions has a consequence, though, for regulators. And this is where I'm interested in. It does have an impact on regulatory compliance cost that can be incurred by individuals and businesses, and therefore hopefully can reduce that cost, such as, in things like regulation that requires authorizations and accreditations and approvals and assessments and reporting and conduct obligations, which is what I'm really focusing on in relation to sustainability reporting for farmers. And of course, the RegTech can help industry code of conduct requirements and inspections and audits and investigations and things like that. So there's a whole host of benefits from RegTech, and people like myself, in terms of regulatory modelling, can provide some input into the conversation. Streamlining regulation, what I've got up there, achieving greater alignment and reduced duplication, helping producers to generate, capture and transmit reliable data, making easier for exporters and regulators to meet a broader range of the importing countries' requirements, pivot quickly in response to trade restrictions, which Australia's been through in the last couple of years, and the foregoing requires using RegTech to support agricultural traceability. So the challenge, therefore, with this increased access with variety, speed and accuracy of data, and the ability from that to monitor marketplaces in compliance with regulatory requirements, needs to provide what I was referring to before through a common network and collaboration platforms that bring together the regulators, regulatory experts, software developers, and farmers. This is the issue, to bring those participants together, to provide a standardized regulatory process and tools to make it easier to coordinate cross-jurisdiction. And of course, the use of RegTech comes with some costs and hurdles. It's not working for me now. Not sure what's going on there. Anyway, I can keep talking. There are some costs and hurdles in relation to using RegTech. The potential benefits can take some years to realise and require substantial investment by business and also regulators. And there's a need to try and ensure the interoperability of processes between different systems. And obviously there are costs to that. And small business is going to have some real challenges to be able to keep up with RegTech developments. I mentioned before that, okay, thank you, Andrew. I mentioned before that, sorry, let's get that right. I mentioned before the issue or the proliferation of the number of platforms out there for RegTech, which is primarily focused on the financial services industry. I'll give you an example of one provider, singlerulebook.com. Singlerulebook.com, where this is a bit of sales speak by the CEO of that company. What we are doing, quote, what we're doing is standardizing, aggregating, and enriching regulatory source inputs in a way that allows for integration and further automation. The hooks into singlerulebook.com go into policy documents maintained by compliance staff, but they also plug directly into code bases of risk engines, reporting software, client advisory software, etc. As processes become more and more automated, and nigh on every process in regulated firms somehow touches on regulation, it becomes essential to create bi-directional links with the regulation across systems. Now, of course, this makes my head spin from a technological point of view. I've got a steep learning curve to embrace this. I come from it as a person familiar with regulatory modelling, but it means to get my head around, I'm particularly interested in sustainability reporting for farmers, and I'm also interested in it from the point of view of sustainable forest management regulation. So some of the practical benefits of that, for example, in relation to forestry, and to some extent relevant to agriculture, is the use of regulation and to meet compliance requirements, which might have quite a radical physical requirement, like unmanned aerial vehicles, drones for regulator monitoring. Accurate and timely data to improve regulator enforcement of heavy vehicle speed limits is one example. More data available for real time for business to demonstrate compliance with livestock tracing. One of the things that I'm doing with the grant application was to work. I've got contacts with Australian Agricultural Code, the oldest agricultural company in Australia, which I would be using as part of that research, as well as the Sundowner Pastoral Code, which is involved in different areas of agriculture and cotton production, etc. And working with them to sort of be on the ground and to try and sort of get feedback in relation to how they would adapt to certain software programs and how they would be able to adapt their business to use the developments in RegTech and how that would interact with regulation. So the regulatory aspects, the way that it impacts regulatory modelling is what I'm interested in particular. And so the considerations for policymakers and regulations, it means that it's about designing regulation in a way that avoids a number of things. It means it's necessary to avoid tying, this might seem a bit contradictory, but it's important that regulation does not tie into administration and compliance with particular technologies. It has to be neutral in that context, but to still be able to be capable, ideally, of being read by a software system. So, in other words, regulators must consider conditions needed for the adoption of RegTech solutions, and an example of that is to ensure that there's clean and structured data that can be accessed by these software systems. And therefore, regulation must enable the interaction between parties, the regulated entities like farmers, the RegTech developers, and other third-party service providers that provide that have to interact in the whole process, and they have to collaborate on potential solutions to encourage, a process of safe testing to make sure that it can be successfully managed. So those things have to be addressed in regulatory design, and this requires, as I said before, greater regulatory neutrality, not to be identified with any one particular form of technology. And so regulation has to be keeping up to date with the rapid advances in technology, and keep pace with the developments in the digital economy, because the advances in technology and the way that the RegTech service providers and the products that are available there means that it's necessary to regularly review the form of regulation. It's important to regularly review the form of regulations, as well as attendant issues. For example, how regulation or the impact regulation has on the regulated entities and the use of artificial intelligence, for example. In relation to artificial intelligence, there is an issue there where we need to that government and regulators have to consider, and that is who bears responsibility and accountability when consumers rely on the use of artificial intelligence information to meet compliance requirements. There could be associated costs which need to be thought about by regulators in relation to the use of artificial intelligence. And also the accountability for outcomes of regulation of RegTech solutions. Accountability for the outcomes of RegTech solutions, which may impose a cost or have some negative effect. This is untested for some technologies. So there's an issue there. When underlying codes and platforms of the RegTech solution may contain a small error, then this has a potential to create widespread errors that can lead to a high, really vast liability risk. On a larger scale than that would be caused by a single individual human error in a manual system. And I mentioned before that with this great access to data, this creates an increased problem for complying with the Privacy Act principles, privacy principles under the Privacy Act for business. And again, that is another challenge for regulatory modelling. So there's a vast number of issues. It's a very positive thing, but we need to be aware of the costs and the testing that needs to be done to address the costs and address the risks. But by far, there's so many developments and so many benefits. And just to reinforce some of those benefits with RegTech, the benefits of RegTech can be, well, I've been speaking about the benefits of RegTech, but just to reinforce it and summarise it, it's about streamlined compliance, where the RegTech software can provide business with an automated way to stay up to date to maintain compliance. We've seen it in the financial services industry. We haven't yet properly developed that same level of sophistication with the agricultural industry. As I mentioned before, we still need to develop the common network and collaboration platforms that brings the regulators, regulatory experts, software developers, and farmers together. Now, but certainly the aim of RegTech is to streamline compliance, increase efficiency. So where you've got an automated RegTech software solution, you can quickly detect potential issues before they become a problem, reduce the amount of time needed to investigate and resolve issues, help improve operational efficiencies, etc. Another benefit is enhanced risk management. RegTech software provides in-depth reports and analysis, which allows organisations to better understand their regulatory risks, help business create policies that protect against compliance errors. RegTech can improve collaboration. RegTech software offers a centralised platform where multiple stakeholders can easily collaborate on various aspects of regulation, compliance and risk management. And RegTech can provide cost savings. Automated RegTech tools help reduce costs associated with hiring additional staff or investing in expensive consultants in order to get them to remain compliant when you can get a RegTech solution to do it for you. And a number of the RegTech solutions that are currently being used can be integrated into existing systems to eliminate the need for further specialised software investments that may not be necessary because of the RegTech software development. So the challenge, therefore, that I was talking about to bring, to have a number of the platforms that can bring the parties together, the stakeholders together, this needs to be able to ideally address in terms of the technology, a single data feed. So regulatory intelligence updates and news from a range of external sources all brought together in one feed is the holy grail, I suppose, of the technology involved. Use of an automated preliminary assessment of the impact of changes needs to be made in other words, the testing that I was talking about before needs to be made to allow for appropriate risk mapping to support the introduction of the RegTech solution into the business. There's issues really in relation to related documentation and automated signpost to all related audits, policies, rules and documents. There's a number of documents that need to be aligned with the use of the RegTech software, depending on the type of thing that we're talking about. Something that allows for automated workflows, streamlined automated workflows that enable the implementation of changes that are necessary to meet compliance obligations. Notification capability, streamlined and automated notifications to relevant stakeholders regarding tasks which need to be actioned, so a red flag system. A system that enables a dashboard system, a real-time dashboard of regulatory issues across the business, which should be readily available to senior management and review. And a system that is flexible, one that should not be too rigid and should cater to the dynamic needs of the business. And so, for example, that may mean streamlined workflows for smaller projects, while larger programs may make use of more of the system's features. So whilst it's a very positive environment that we're talking about in terms of the movement into the RegTech space, it's still not developed properly for the agricultural traceability system. We don't have the same platform that applies to the fintech industry. And I look at it from my own past experience in relation to forestry management regulation. And I saw what I consider to be a catastrophic failure of risk-based regulation in the state that I'm originally from, in Victoria, in relation to sustainability requirements under the relevant act there for public forestry, which does require a mandatory application of a rule called the precautionary principle, which says that where there's a risk of serious and irreversible damage to the environment, a lack of scientific uncertainty should not prevent precautionary measures to be taken where there's a possibility that those precautionary measures can remove or reduce the risk. As a result of a case that I've looked at closely, Environment East Gippsland versus Vic Forest, which is the public forest down there. Vic Forests were unbelievably culpable in failing to apply the precautionary principle in circumstances where they were made known in advance about the need for applying this principle in relation to particular coops in the Brown Mountain area of East Gippsland in Victoria. Now, I've written about this extensively, and the failure to apply this principle could be addressed by RegTech, where RegTech, for example, what was required was that what they should have done, and they didn't do, was to have an environmental assessment done prior to undertaking for harvesting, because they were notified of the presence of endangered species in the area. So a compliance red flag could be addressed by RegTech. The aerial surveys can be addressed, that might be part of the assessment process, could be addressed by RegTech. The spatial investigations that are needed could be looked at from a RegTech perspective. The red flag approach that needed to be made, and which was ignored by Vic Forest culpably and negligently, could be addressed through RegTech. And so I'm actually writing about this I've written about it in a book that's going to be released in terms of systems thinking and the law, which is a case study in natural resource management. That's the title. And I talk about RegTech in relation to forest management and the use of, because it's a systems approach to the law, the RegTech's, the system, or the traceability system that I was speaking about earlier, is enhanced by RegTech, but we must be able to properly structure the system, and therefore that needs to make sure that there is a proper interface with regulation. And the risk of not applying the precautionary principle and reducing culpable negligent behaviour by a public forestry harvesting body can be avoided. So getting back to agricultural sustainability and agricultural traceability, we're looking at the objects is to streamline agricultural compliance obligations and to be able to develop a system that applies to address traceability and agricultural traceability included within that. That will help to identify the sustainability credentials of products and other benefits, other provenance and other efficiencies from it. To develop systems to help farmers to meet their reporting obligations for sustainability and other reporting obligations, which is increasing on farmers, to make it easier for them to meet their reporting obligations, to trace products along, and then also once it leaves the farm and it goes from paddock to plate, there's the ability to trace the provenance of the goods along the supply chain to eliminate bottlenecks, and to be able to ensure that there is a process in place that is accessible for regulators, farming bodies, and other interested parties, to show that the credentials meet the regulatory standards, and to deal with the issues that I've highlighted and provide for means of jurisdictional harmonisation, so that we've got one system that applies across the board for all jurisdictions within Australia. So that's a big thing, which is where we're there are going to be many participants in getting to that point, but we're not there yet. I mentioned that I did make a grant application because the federal government has, with going back to the National Agricultural Traceability Grant Program, government has devoted about $65 million to research projects that are designed to get that platform and that collaborative platform together for all of the parties. And we'll wait and see what happens with that. I'm not holding my breath, but there's also another grant program that's looking at sustainability reporting for farmers, which is a separate grant program. And so I'm looking at it from both the macro and the micro perspective. I want it to be so that the small to medium-sized farmers can not find this a headache. that they can address their reporting obligations in a way that is not going to incur too much cost because they're already under pressure for cost, and that they can meet their reporting obligations, which are increasing, much more easier and at hopefully lower cost. So just to finish off, I'm looking at a report from KPMG talking about the RegTech revolution and saying there's a revolution coming. I used that analogy in the advertising paraphernalia that, RegTech is becoming the way of the future. And, there was a RegTech association formed in 2017. There is this program of agricultural traceability and the use of RegTech becoming very important. And KPMG, in talking about a revolution coming, this is what they said: RegTech is on the cusp of a breakthrough that has the potential to transform the industry's approach to compliance and create additional value. They are looking at it from the finance industry perspective, but I'm looking at it from the agricultural industry's perspective. The potential for RegTech 3, that third stage that I'm talking about, which was talking about a move from know your customer to know your data, is backed by support from regulators, impetus for digital change, growing levels of investment, and a proliferation of startups seeking to meet demand alongside big tech companies. This has been driven up until now by the developments within the financial sector and fintech, but is now full speed ahead in relation to agricultural traceability, sustainability traceability, and the development of platforms. And just to give you, I was just aware in some other work that I was doing in another context, RegTech is in other areas. For example, conveyancing. There's all conveyancing is conducted electronic now, e-conveyancing. And the platform that they've got is called PEXA, and everything has to be done electronically. And I remember talking to practitioners about the use of that electronic technology. When it was coming in, there was all sorts of moaning going on, and I sort of understand where they're coming from. We've got to get this new system, we've got to become conversant with it. And I think it's pretty mainstream now and everyone's using it. But once you get over that initial resistance to that people that aren't that technologically aware may have, it becomes second nature after a while. And that's where we want to get to in relation to agricultural traceability and the use of RegTech generally in the industry. And using that conveyancing example, not only does it ultimately make it easier for the participants, but it also represents a platform that captures data, and it can be used by the banks and the titles office and regulators to interact in one platform. And that's what needs to happen with agricultural traceability. And so I'd like to be I'm trying to be part of that process and getting to a point where we can, like with the e-conveyancing platform of PEXA, to get to a point where it's a commonly accepted practice, regulatory costs are reduced, there's a smile for once on farmers' faces because of their meeting their compliance obligations a bit easier. Regulators can meet their compliance obligations as well at a lower cost, and hopefully everyone's happy. But that may be a tall ask, but that's the aim of the game. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rhett. So it is time for questions, and what I'm going to do first is ask Ipswich if you had any questions.
I have a question, Sarah. Rhett,
sorry,
thank you.
There's a little bit of feedback.
That's okay. Yeah.
Oh, all good now.
Okay, thank you. I'll speak slowly, that might help a little bit. Rhett, I'm on my lunch break in between two construction law seminars, and I'm going this afternoon into the seminar to talk about the regulation of construction. We use, or one of the things we think about is Paula Gerber's regulatory theory. And because she's also a construction lawyer, she says that construction law students and graduates need, construction law students and graduates need to be able to understand the philosophy that sits under any regulatory regime. And I apologise if you addressed this at the beginning because I was late after my morning seminar. But what philosophy or philosophies? So is the philosophy of this regulation sector specific? Is it specific to different sectors of agriculture? And would the philosophy that the regulators bring be different from the philosophy, for example, of the producers? Sorry, fairly long-winded question. Thanks, Rhett.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Julie. I wouldn't say that there's a clearly identified philosophy, other than we're talking about regulatory modelling that's going to reduce regulatory compliance cost, but there is also a strong need to identify the provenance of product, services, goods and services, and to meet compliance, regulatory compliance in terms of particularly with export markets. That's a big thing from the government's point of view. So from a philosophy, if you like, it sort of fits into my idea of risk-based adaptive management based regulation, responsive regulation that is dynamic in terms of its ability to pivot and adapt so that the regulator can access data and make an adaptive management response. So it's very much risk-based adaptive management type philosophy. I know, like in terms of regulatory theory, there's a lot of things that could be said about this, which may or may not be relevant in terms of regulatory theory, but I look at it from a point of view of what I've been doing in sustainability regulation, to make the ability for regulation to have feedback loops, reinforcing or balancing feedback loops, or to enable data flow that creates the ability to make an adaptive management decision. Completely and utterly lacking in the Sustainable Forest Timber Act in Victoria. Completely devoid of it. And, completely unable to make an adaptive management decision. So it's a dynamic process of information coordination to enable that to happen. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Julie, but that's the sort of philosophy that I would identify with.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really interesting.
Pauline.
Thanks, Rhett. Interesting to engage with an entirely different area. I presume that's working. I think three things that I'm probably just seeking clarification or just raising. And you mentioned artificial intelligence 3 times. I would have thought this area was absolutely ripe for artificial intelligence usage. And of course, as we know, that's going to be, as you said, there's going to be revolution, but I think there's revolution from the artificial intelligence. I noticed you said that the code policymakers need to write it so that it's in a way that it can be machine readable. Well, AI will be able to just jump ahead with that. And initially I was hearing that, that the regulator must take concern that the data they have can be utilised by these various software companies and technology so that there can be whole proliferation of which there is. But then towards the end, I heard you say, I think that one platform is a good thing. So I'm kind of curious as to why the regulator has to worry about that. Sure, they should have a platform that the data of 5 horses are taken from this area and moved to this area and they end up as dog meat or something somewhere else. that standard data, and I'm thinking like ASX, you know, the share market platform, so that the government has one platform that it kind of regulates that all this data goes into, and then individuals can take their own technology, software, and companies to manage their own version of that. But I would have thought AI might have some real inputs in there. And so I guess that question wraps up as to why does the regulatory authority have to be so concerned about, facilitating all these technology companies? And the last one is, with this sort of data, which is obviously huge for business and profitability and, massive private, as you've mentioned, the privacy issue, but I didn't really hear cybersecurity. So I'm just wondering about how putting all this data in this technological, and if there's many different ones, what cybersecurity regulation will do in this area and how it will impact, because it's costly.
There's a lot in that, what you've been asking me, and I don't think I can sort of meaningfully comment about the cybersecurity aspect of it. It's something that obviously needs to be looked at. But getting back to the issue about why should the regulator be involved from the AI perspective, or possibly what I meant wider than that as well. I think the only comment I can really make about that is that you talk about, the regulator has to be concerned about the form of regulation and its potential costs. And so we're talking about, in this instance, the participants in agriculture, which could be, which includes small to medium farmers who won't necessarily have the accessibility and the resources and the education to address this. So that has to be looked at as well. And I mentioned before about the who bears the responsibility and accountability when consumers rely on the use of artificial intelligence to meet compliance requirements. Well, look, it's probably a bit beyond my knowledge base, but there are some positive and negative risks involving the use of artificial intelligence, and I would suggest that, there's some potential costs. And one of them is, for example, breaching the privacy principles under the Privacy Act, and issues connected to that, which may impact farmers and it may have a cost. So I don't think the regulator can avoid that. I think that needs to be looked at from their end as well. But I mentioned before about the accountability for the outcomes of RegTech solutions is untested for some technologies, and I think that maybe the regulator shouldn't necessarily be responsible for that. But the reality, though, is that if there's an interaction between the regulator, the regulation, the farming participants, and the software providers, which create a small error that has got the capability of creating a huge cost, technological context, which has to be, I don't think can be ignored by government. I'm sorry, I don't think I can really meaningfully address the cybersecurity aspect. I acknowledge the point you make about the cybersecurity. I think it's a very good one. But that's how I'd look at it from the other point you were making. From that point, I just think it gets back to accountability and responsibility, which I think is part of regulatory theory, having accountable and responsible regulation that addresses the accountability issues fully. And I don't think government can ignore that when they structure regulation to be aligned with RegTech solutions. But that's my take on it, Pauline. But obviously, that needs to be looked at further in terms of how regulatory modelling takes place. But thank you for that. Thanks, Andrew.
Do we have any other questions? Yes?
As you mentioned, they're two different, forest regulation and agriculture regulation. There's a clear-cut difference, as you mentioned. But in agriculture today, there are regulations within the companies, they operate, they have traceability systems, and these farmers, they have a group of farmers, they do traceability and they do export, but they are within the company, okay? They are not exposed. If this farmer is out of that system in a group of a company, they don't get a premium price. So like cotton you mentioned, like, might be MP, or like coffee, for example, if you take like Starbucks or Nestle, they buy coffee from origins where the group of farmers, they have like a standards at the farm level. There is a like Rainforest Alliance, or like Starbucks has their own standard of farming, and these are audited by third party. Okay, this has to be integrated into the regulation at a certain point of time when you develop the software, because this has to be like a premium market. As you told, that you need to explore the markets in a destination where they want to know like what's happening at the farm level. So there should be a complete streamline. As you mentioned, the development of software and regulation is needed to avoid disputes, like elsewhere. Like if you have a proper regulation, it gives confidence for the businesses to do trading and to get a premium price for the farmers who participate in this system. So what's your take like on this one? Like currently they are like a system within the companies.
I'm not quite sure exactly. So you're talking about these disparate elements within a system that need to be brought together.
Exactly, yeah. Because for example, if you take like Nestle, they have their own traceability system for coffee buying. Okay, they buy from farmers. They have lot of data, the farming data, and also where it goes to the factory and to the customer. They have the data internally. So it's not like made public, this one. And if you take like cotton today, grown in Australia, bought by Walam Agro or like any other company, they have this proper documentation. They have the software systems within the company. It's not accessible to public or like anybody.
Is your question asking about how can regulation deal with it disparate?
Yeah, to bring all these guys into this platform.
Well,
yeah.
There's no simple answer to that, but I just make the point that in talking about systems thinking and the law, which I've written about, it does require a move away from regulation that, for want of a better way of looking at it, is silo-based regulation, which is like, I'm using my understanding of forestry regulation, and I'm referring to the Sustainable Forest Timber Act 2004 in Victoria, which is purporting to set up a sustainable forest management system, which would require multiple, like if it was truly doing that, which it isn't, but if it was truly doing that, it would be moving away from the silo linear regulatory modelling, and it would address the wider system-wide impacts to address the point that you're making. And that does require a lot of regulatory modelling that which moves away from a linear form of regulation, which addresses a system-based form of regulation that will take into account the things that you're referring to. I can only just talk about that in general terms to address your question. So that regulatory modelling from a systems thinking perspective is the way that I would address the points you make. And that's a wider question, a wider issue that is wider than what we're talking about here with agricultural traceability and the rise of RegTech. But nevertheless, RegTech can work into that type of thing that I'm talking about. It does mean that in that context, in the wider scenario that you mentioned, requires quite radical changes away from that linear form of regulation, such as that act, which just addresses one thing without reference to the other potential stakeholders that are involved. That's a much bigger regulatory reform agenda that needs to be taken, and which I do write about, but I'm happy to talk about it further. And when the book is available, Systems Thinking and the Law, and a case study in natural resource management, you might be interested in having a look at that, and it may address what you're talking about a little bit more.
Sure, thank you. Yeah.